27th of September, our top stories tonight. Germany's major parties scramble to form a coalition in the aftermath of the weekend's general election, as Japan's ruling party prepares to vote in a new Prime Minister. Transport troubles in the UK trigger fuel shortages and panic buying. And thousands of Indian farmers return to the streets to protest against agricultural reforms. You're watching The World. Also, what can we learn from the weekend prisoner swap deal after a US-China deal? Well, Queensland has recorded a local case of COVID-19 in the community, with the source of the infection so far a mystery. Queensland Health tonight says the man in his 30s works in aviation. A public health alert has been issued for places in Eaton's Hill, Aspley and Albany Creek on Brisbane's north side, as well as a truck seat company at Rockley on the south side. Well, one of the leading candidates to be Germany's next Chancellor says his party has won the mandate to form a coalition and govern the country. Olaf Scholz's Socialist Democrats won 25% of the votes during yesterday's general election. Now, that's closely followed by the Christian Democrats of the outgoing leader Angela Merkel. They are sitting on 24%. Now, while both parties are well short of a majority, Mr. Scholz says the voting signalled who should be in talks to form a coalition government.
Die Wählerinnen und Wähler haben auch sehr klar gesprochen. Sie haben gesagt,
the voters have clearly spoken over who should form the next government. They strengthened three parties, the Social Democrats, the Greens and the FDP. And that is the clear mandate that the citizens of this country have given. These three should form the next government.
And the SDP leader also says he's hoping to form that coalition before Christmas. And that means Angela Merkel may have to remain in the caretaker role for several weeks yet. Support for her Christian Democrats has slumped below 25% for the first time. Our Europe correspondent Steve Kinane is reporting from Berlin.
Celebrating a swing to the left for Germany, which could see the Social Democrats lead a government for the first time in 16 years. The result is still too close to call, but they're feeling confident.
It's certain that many German citizens voted Social Democrats because they want a change in government.
The centre-right candidate, backed by Angela Merkel, is not conceding defeat, even though projections show the party is heading for its worst ever result.
We will do everything possible to build a Conservative-led government. Germany now needs a future coalition that modernises our country.
Whoever wins will need to form a multi-party coalition, and negotiations to agree to a new government could take months. Angela Merkel will stay on in a caretaker role until a successor is sworn in. The vote was fragmented, with the two main parties getting less than 30% each.
I voted for change, but not a dramatic change.
The climate crisis is the most pressing issue we have to deal with urgently.
The Greens are running third with its highest ever vote. Now they and the pro-business Free Democrats will be courted to help form a majority. This will be the first time since the 1950s that Germany will have a three-party coalition forming government. To achieve that will take some big compromises from some strange bedfellows. Angela Merkel might remain in the Chancellor's chair for a while yet. Steve Kinane, ABC News, Berlin.
And we'll have more on the possible makeup of Germany's next government with political analyst Katharina Karcher a little later. Well, the United Kingdom is experiencing a major fuel shortage after a run on petrol stations around the country. The crisis was sparked by a shortage of tanker drivers, leaving a small number of service stations without fuel. That triggered panic buying, and now at least half the country's petrol stations have run completely dry.
I've been here nearly an hour waiting for my turn to fill up the car.
People are going a bit nuts because 6 a.m. in the morning people are queuing up for petrol.
Panic, fuel panic.
The government says it will issue thousands of emergency visas for foreign truck drivers and could even call on soldiers to help meet the shortfall. Well, at least one person has been killed. Several others are injured after a strong earthquake struck the Greek island of Crete. Authorities say the victim died after a church dome collapsed following the 5.8 magnitude quake. Repeated aftershocks added to the damage in villages near the epicentre. The Athens Geodynamic Institute said the quake struck at 9:17 this morning and its epicentre was around 246 kilometres southeast of Athens. And the volcanic eruption on the Spanish island of La Palma has intensified, destroying a village church. The church had a narrow escape last week, but fires sparked by the volcano's lava reached the building this time, bringing down the bell tower. Hundreds of homes have been destroyed and thousands of residents have been evacuated. The volcano started erupting just over a week ago, and it still has 2 active lava flows running both north and south. A maverick, an ultra-conservative, a fading Liberal and a Mr Nobody. Well, that's how it's shaping up to be for the people in the running to take over from Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. A little more than a year ago, after taking over as leader, Mr Suga has announced he won't seek re-election, creating an unexpected opening to replace him. Andrea Neerhoff looks at who could take the top job.
Shoulder to shoulder and ready to fight. One of these 4 candidates is set to be Japan's next Prime Minister.
I'm running for the Liberal Democratic Party leadership election to show that the LDP listens to the people and to protect our nation's democracy.
Former Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida lost to Yoshihide Suga in the previous election. He says a government led by him will prioritise transparency and accountability and will restore unity for Japan's post-pandemic future.
Well, one day I will be the Prime Minister.
Popular frontrunner Taro Kono is a familiar face on the political scene. Leading the vaccination rollout, the fluent English speaker has broad appeal across age groups, though might find it difficult to distance himself from criticism of the current leadership.
Whether the lawmakers cast a vote based on their own groups or be responsive to the public opinion, the way they do politics and its governance will be changed depending on who will be the Prime Minister of Japan.
Unusually, 2 women are also in the running, though they have to win over a conservative and largely male governing party, a task former Gender Equality Minister Seiko Noda is used to.
Women are in the extreme minority in politics. The gender ratio of the voters is 50-50. I believe that having the same number in politics can create a good balance, so let's work on it together.
A slightly more likely female pick, ex-Internal Affairs Minister Sane Takaichi, a close associate of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The known right-winger is pushing to strengthen Japan's armed forces. But she's already angered some by visiting a controversial shrine honouring Japan's war dead, including convicted war criminals.
We need to think there is a high potential of a Taiwan Strait emergency and be prepared, but there is a limit to what Japan can do militarily.
Whoever wins the September 29 vote faces falling voter ratings over the handling of COVID-19, as well as a struggling economy. Andrea Neerhoff, ABC News.
India's farmers are back on the streets, marking a year of protest against the Modi government legislation that they say is threatening their livelihoods. Thousands brought road and rail traffic to a halt across the country, including on the edges of New Delhi, cutting off access to neighbouring states. The government says the laws will modernise agriculture and boost production through private investments, but the farmers say that by ending guaranteed pricing, they'll be forced to sell to large corporations at cheaper prices. Well, floods left by tropical storm Dianmu have submerged at least a third of Thailand's provinces and inundated areas of central Vietnam after making landfall over the weekend. In Thailand, flash floods affected almost 60,000 families, and in Vietnam, at least 600 houses were damaged and 2,500 crops destroyed. Local authorities have warned there may be further flooding, especially in Bangkok along the Chao Phraya River. Well, Scott Morrison is strongly signalling he might not attend major global climate talks later this year so he can oversee Australia's emergence from rolling lockdowns. Just weeks out from the United Nations talks, the Prime Minister is yet to reach agreement with the Nationals, who seem to be in disarray. One prominent MP has accused some colleagues of attempting to push a hard right agenda. Here's our political editor, Andrew Probyn.
For low-lying Pacific Island nations, global warming is an existential threat.
There used to be a road there, but now that road is no more.
Kiribati is at risk of being swamped by rising seas. It's again asking Australia to step up on climate change.
We ask Australia that as a neighbour, it should be doing something big.
Scott Morrison's heard the neighbourly message in person, and while he's inching towards formal embrace of a net zero emissions by 2050 target, he says commitments from developed countries aren't going to be enough.
Because unless we can put developing countries and developed countries on the path to net zero, well, the world just gets hotter.
The Morrison government have net zero credibility on climate change.
World leaders gather in Glasgow in November to hear emission reduction commitments, although the Prime Minister might not attend.
It's a significant undertaking, as you know, involves the 2-week domestic quarantine as well. So no final decisions have been made.
Scott Morrison's failure to attend shows the contempt that he holds Australia's children's and future generations in.
Wrangling agreement with the coalition's junior partner on net zero is a more pressing task for the PM. The Nationals' internal tensions prompting one of its more progressive members to temporarily step away.
I need to take some time away from some of my colleagues who really, I felt, are trying to push a hard right-wing agenda which I wasn't comfortable with.
We hear the concerns of people and try to make sure that we do all we can to keep everybody in the tent.
The spat inside the Nationals is not going to prevent Scott Morrison signing up to net zero, even if he does stay away from the climate change conference. The PM might figure there's little to be politically gained from being in Glasgow, when back home lockdowns are lifting and the hospital and health system is under greatest strain. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
Well, let's return to our top story, and results are in from yesterday's election in Germany. The Social Democrats with the slight edge claiming a mandate to form the next government, but that may not become clear for some months yet. Katharina Karcher is from the University of Birmingham and she joins us now. Katharina, a really interesting one at the end, probably a little closer than some had thought.
Good evening. Yes, indeed. We expected a close call and the polls suggest that it would be close, but nobody expected it to be that close. So a lot of people have had very little sleep last night in Germany following this.
I'm sure. The Social Democrats, though, claiming that they have a mandate, do you think they are the most likely? Are they the ones that, you know, given the slight shift to the left, have the real mandate to go forward?
I would say so, yes, because there were also 2 federal elections and they were the strongest party in both of those as well. So there is a clear appetite for the Social Democrats to take the lead. But at the same time, it's a hugely complicated landscape and we will have to wait a few months at least to see whether they will manage to form a government.
So this is so interesting. Tell us about this elephants round table, as it's known, as where the horse trading happens.
Yeah, elephants round table, I think, is a very German concept, but I was told that now some of the neighbouring countries are using it as well. It's all the big names of politics coming together to try to agree on issues. And we had some before the election and now there will be more. But I think the really interesting talks this time will happen behind closed doors. So I'd really like to be like a mouse sitting in some of those conversations, especially between the junior partners in the likely governments. So that's where the really interesting discussions are probably going to happen.
All right, let's look at those discussions, those possibilities. The Social Democrats, the Greens, are they likely to be could they be the backbone of any new coalition?
Probably. So there is the traffic light coalition. That's one of the likely outcomes between the Social Democrats, the Reds, and then the yellow for the Liberals and green for the Green Party. But there's still a lot of disagreements, especially between the two junior partners, so the Liberals and the Green Party. So there's also a Jamaica coalition possibility, and a lot of those are thrown around at the moment in the discussions. And it's really something that will depend on the junior partners. They have a lot of power in these conversations, and that's a really unknown phenomenon in German politics. We haven't had a situation like this since the beginning of the Federal Republic in 1949.
So which parties do you think are the strongest junior parties at this point?
It's definitely the Greens and the Liberals, and they are likely to be involved in any government because there will probably be at least 3 parties involved in the government. And then the question is, are they going to work with the SPD, which is more likely, but it's not guaranteed. They could also work with Armin Laschet and the CDU.
Yeah. So what are the chances of that? Of course, they didn't get a great showing, but still, 24%, not a complete obliteration for the CDU. What sort of give and take have they got to offer, given the Greens are probably far more to the left than they are?
There's actually a lot of affinities. Yeah, it's interesting that you raised that point. There's a lot of affinities between parts of the Conservatives and parts of the Greens, and there's local governments where they work together successfully. But it is a huge gambling and discussion space at the moment. And I think Armin Laschet has toned down a little bit. He initially said, I will be the next chancellor, and he took that back and has become a bit more quiet. But I really think we shouldn't rule him out because Scholz is quite a strong person, someone who's very confident, but also not difficult to work with. And his political allies, potential allies, know that. So we shouldn't rule out the CDU too soon, I think.
OK. Merkel strangely stays on as caretaker until this is resolved. You get the feeling that she's probably would like to make an exit as soon as possible. So how long could she be there for?
If you're an optimist, you would say she might have some Christmas holidays this year, but there's a lot of pessimists around. So it will at least be until Christmas, and then we might have a New Year's speech from a new chancellor, but it may well drag on a bit longer.
So at this point, too, not very clear of the role of Germany going forward in the EU, or do you think nothing much there is going to change?
It's fascinating. I looked at some of the international news coverage this morning, and there's a huge amount of anxiety around the stability of the German country, essentially, and the German democracy. And I don't think that we have to worry about that. I think Germany will remain a quite stable and liberal country, so that's not going to change. But I think I'm an optimist, and I would say that maybe there will be now some new voices that they have to listen to within Germany, but also in the European Union as a whole. We have an environmental movement, we have some really urgent issues, we have migration, we have asylum, we have a lot of areas that need to be looked at on a European level as much as on a German level. So we hope that there will be more of a discussion about these urgent issues on a European level, and that would be a very good thing. But Germany is certainly not going to crumble as a democracy.
No, I'm sure no time soon, and thankfully for that. Really going to be fascinating to watch. Katarina, good to talk. Thanks.
Bye.
Well, the New South Wales Premier has issued a plea for everyone to just hang in there as October the 11th is scheduled for the lockdown to end. By then, 70% of adults will be fully vaccinated. Regional travel was due to start at the same time, but that has now been delayed. It's now part of the roadmap to freedoms when the 80% vaccination target is reached, probably just 2 weeks later. Now, those who are not immunised will have to wait until December to come out of lockdown. Here's state political reporter Ashley Raper.
It's been a while.
Everybody's sort of, dying to get through the front door.
Outdoor pools opened today.
It's good to be back.
Construction sites were also back, operating at full capacity. The whole state is very close to reopening to the fully vaccinated when the 70% double dose target is met.
We envisage 11th of October will be the day. It is just this week and next week that we have to hang in there for. We're nearly there.
There have been some tweaks to the plan. Only 20 people will be able to sit together at hospitality venues, and regional travel won't be allowed.
So those in Greater Metro Sydney travelling to the regions not until we get to 80%.
That 80% mark is expected in about 4 weeks, and there'll be extra freedoms. The number of visitors to a home will increase from 5 to 10 people. Community sport will start again. Caps on numbers at weddings will be scrapped and dancing allowed, but the 1 person per 4 square metre rule remains. The same will apply to funerals. The limit on clients at hairdressers and nail salons will also be removed, and people will be able to stand up and drink at hospitality venues.
If you want to be able to have a meal with friends, if you want to welcome people into your home, you have to get vaccinated.
The unvaccinated, though, will be able to go to places of worship.
There's a risk involved, and look, faith leaders can take decisions themselves as to what they do.
12 more people have died, which takes the death toll during this lockdown to more than 300. Cases are declining. The Premier has always been tight-lipped about when freedoms will be granted to the unvaccinated. But now December the 1st has been unveiled as that date. Gladys Berejiklian is hopeful that more than 90% of the adult population will be fully vaccinated then, and insists revealing a date doesn't undermine the vaccination push.
Today's an extremely disappointing day for the unvaccinated. They're going to have to wait longer than they assumed.
Restrictions will ease further on December the 1st. There'll be no limit on the number of visitors to a home or on gatherings outside. Masks will only be mandatory on public transport, on planes and in airports, and for hospitality workers serving customers. It'll be up to employers to decide what they do about working from home, and the density rule will change for almost all venues. Nightclubs will also be able to reopen, and there can be big outdoor events. Ashley Raper, ABC News, Sydney.
The Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews says Victoria will not follow the lead of New South Wales. The state's vaccine rates are inching closer to reaching key national benchmarks, and Daniel Andrews says lockdowns can't be in place forever. Victoria today recorded another 705 new cases, and a man in his 70s has died. Bridget Rollison has the latest.
In 3 weeks, this Warrnambool pub could be a pub with no beer for the unvaccinated.
I'm sure some people will kick off and complain that they can't get in because they're not double vaxxed, but certainly, if they're the rules, they're the rules, and we're happy to go with that.
Next month, Victoria's first no jab, no entry rules will be introduced, with Warrnambool one of the regional cities taking part in the trial, but there's still many unanswered questions.
Do they need security guards? Is this going to escalate into something very difficult? That's why it's a trial.
I think it would be great, especially if it means if we can get back to some normality.
But while Victoria is still locking in trials, New South Wales has announced a goal that will unlock freedoms for all its residents.
I'm hopeful and optimistic that by the time we get to 1 December, we will have over 90% of our adult population double dosed.
Once it hits that target, nightclubs reopen and masks won't be needed in the office, and the unvaccinated will have the same rights as those who've been jabbed. But Daniel Andrews says that won't be replicated in Victoria anytime soon.
I'm not going to be saying to people, "I'll just wait 5 weeks and you'll be able to have all the freedoms." No, that's not a guarantee at all here. But we will have people locked out of venues and events like the Boxing Day test if they haven't had 2 jabs.
We're lagging so far behind, we're falling behind.
Victoria recorded 705 new cases. 30% of those were in the Hume LGA, while New South Wales recorded 787, its lowest figure in over a month. Cases there began to stabilise when they hit the 50% double dose mark. We're not far away, and to accelerate the rollout, GPs and pharmacies across 11 Melbourne council areas can apply for grants of up to $10,000.
So the time to get vaccines tends to be after hours, outside business as usual, and at weekends. And as we all know in our society, that means there's a cost implication.
The Premier says changes are also coming to the isolation rules. Victorians who've been caught at Tier 1 exposure sites may no longer need to stay home for 14 days, with health authorities considering relaxing the rules once we hit that 80% double dose target. Bridget Rollison, ABC News, Melbourne.
Well, let's return to the UK, where petrol stations have run out of fuel because of a shortage of truck drivers. We're joined now by Senior Lecturer in Supply Chain Management at Liverpool John Moores University, Sarah Schiffling. Sarah, good to talk to you. This is quite an astonishing situation. What's caused the run on petrol?
Oh, it is quite the situation we've got going here. So what we've got is obviously some petrol stations running out of fuel right now, and we've seen quite long queues at some of the other ones. That is partially because some petrol stations have had supply issues. We have enough fuel in the country. That's not the issue. It's more the problem of getting it from the depots to the extra petrol stations. We've got a lorry driver shortage here at the moment, so we don't have enough drivers to actually drive trucks, and that's really affecting the tankers that we need to actually fill our fuel stations. So that's the issue right now, and that started last week, and of course we've seen pictures on the media and social media. So lots of people then realised, ooh, if we're running out of petrol, I'd better fill up my car now. And that's why we see huge demand and these long queues. And of course, petrol stations can't just service demand. We've seen some figures of petrol stations saying they've got 500% their normal demand right now. Well, that's really difficult to actually fulfill. So we've seen more stations running out, and it's kind of become this vicious circle. More people trying to buy, more stations running out, more people panicking.
Yes, it's that classic chicken and egg. But why is there a truck driver shortage?
The truck driver shortage has a multitude of different reasons. It's kind of a chronic issue. We've had a truck driver shortage for years, but it's come to a head now. On one hand, because of Brexit, because a lot of drivers that were driving in the UK came from continental European nations. But that's not the only thing. It's also because of COVID, because for a long time we didn't need as many drivers. So people went back home. A lot of those European drivers went to their home countries for the pandemic, quite reasonably, and now they can't come back in because of visa regulations, but also because of the pandemic. We haven't had as many drivers taking tests because we were just unable to do so. So there's a huge backlog of tests now. And also, we've got to say the working conditions aren't the greatest, and the pay hasn't been the greatest either. So it's all coming together, and right now we've got a shortage of estimated around 100,000 truck drivers in the UK.
Yeah. So the Prime Minister has said that they'll issue emergency foreign visas. They're even talking about bringing the army in. It sounds like that's just a short-term solution, though.
These are short-term solutions, yes. So the visas for European drivers, these are short-term visas that are being proposed. Is that going to solve the problem? Well, we're already hearing from European haulage associations saying, well, we don't think that actually people want to desperately come. And even if they do, those visas are only proposed for 5,000 drivers. That's 5% of the ones that we want. The army being brought in, that is an emergency plan that's kind of in the drawer anyways, in case of fuel shortages. That was initially drawn up for a no-deal Brexit in case of a fuel shortages there. That is also not the quickest fix. That's bringing in drivers from the army. But of course, drivers from the army aren't just sitting around doing nothing. So they would have to be removed from other deployments and being brought in there. So it's no quick fixes, really, but we are hoping that it will kind of level out now. The great thing about fuel demand is you can only fill up your car once, and then you're kind of using that up. So hopefully the demand will return to normal levels now, and we'll see a bit more of a stable week in terms of petrol stations in the UK.
Now, are there other supply chains, other industries that might be affected in other ways?
Oh, absolutely. There's lots of different ones going on. There's one really complex one in the moment that starts with our really high gas prices at the moment. So gas prices are skyrocketing around here. That is partially because demand is picking up. We're going into the autumn season here. A lot of industry restarting as well. It's also because we're having some other supply issues with electricity, for example. So we're using more gas burning in power stations. So there's high demand and the prices are very high, which now meant that some producers, for example, fertilizer firms, have had to close down because they can't afford the gas for their production. Well, fertilizer firms, on the one hand, influence agriculture, but what probably nobody knew, or not a whole lot of people knew in the UK, they also produce CO2. About 70% of CO2 in the UK is produced by two fertilizer firms that have now closed down, and CO2 is used for example, stunning animals before slaughter or keeping vegetables and meat fresh if they're packaged. So that's having huge knock-on effects on the food supply chain, which is already stretched because food is transported on lorries and we haven't got enough truck drivers. So it's a huge interconnected puzzle here of one supply chain crisis infecting other ones, and all of this is coming back down to basic issues like gas prices and the truck driver shortage.
Yeah. Interesting conundrum, and I'm sure, no doubt, some political fallout ahead. Great to talk to you, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
An Australian-produced musical has stolen the show at this year's Tony Awards in New York. Moulin Rouge was the big winner on Broadway's Night of Nights, taking home 10 awards, including the Tony for Best Musical. It was produced by Sydney-based company Global Creatures and is due to start a Melbourne run next month.
It's such an honour and a thrill to have been able to bring fellow Aussies Baz Luhrmann and Catherine Martin's epic and beloved masterpiece to the stage.
The theme of the night was Broadway is Back, celebrating the return of live theatre to New York stages after an 18-month lockdown. Well, to what in the world, and Britain has been holding parliamentary hearings into that energy supply Sarah was just telling us about, particularly what would happen if they suffered a power shortage. And that was put to the test with one session involving the head of Britain's energy regulator momentarily suspended after he was plunged into darkness.
So we don't attend audit and risk committees, but what we do, apologies, just one moment.
Lights have gone out.
Don't panic, that's not a security of supply issue. Jonathan's room.
Jonathan Brearley returned and assured the committee it was a movement-sensitive light that decided to blink off at a rather awkward time to save energy, not an energy outage. Our top stories tonight on The World. Queensland has recorded one local COVID case in the community, with the source of infection currently under investigation. According to Queensland Health, the man is in his 30s and works in aviation. He hasn't travelled interstate or overseas recently. A public health alert has been issued for locations in Eaton's Hill, Albany Creek, Aspley and Rockley. Germany's centre-left SDP party says it has the mandate to form a coalition government after the weekend's general election. And at least one person has been killed after the Greek island of Crete was struck by a 5.8 magnitude earthquake. Well, 3 people have been killed in a train derailment in the US state of Montana. The Amtrak service that runs between Seattle and Chicago derailed on Saturday afternoon. 5 people have been taken to hospital with injuries. Amtrak says the train had about 141 passengers and 16 crew on board. It's praised the emergency response.
There are 3 confirmed fatalities. Injured were transported to many local hospitals. People were treated and released. There are 5 still in care at Benefice in Great Falls. All of them are stabilized. It's, amazing the turnout, just the community in general, helping everyone. There were even citizens that helped get people out of, and get them to where they needed to go.
Reconstruction of homes in Gaza that were destroyed or damaged in May's conflict between Israel and Hamas will begin next month. Qatar and Egypt have each pledged nearly $700 million in aid for the operation. Israel has limited access to materials. Restrictions on steel and cement have been lifted, allowing authorities to begin rebuilding. Gaza's Hamas-run government says Israeli airstrikes destroyed about 2,200 homes in the enclave and damaged 37,000 others. Now to what looked very much like a prisoner swap agreement between China, Canada and the US. Huawei Chief Financial Officer Meng Wanzhou was released from prison and arrived in China on Saturday, ending her near 3-year US extradition fight. 2 Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, detained by Beijing for more than 1,000 days and arrested just days after Meng's arrest, also returned home. Yun Zhang is Director of China Policy Centre and editor of the China Story at the Australian National University. She says this is not unusual.
The deals struck between the United States and China are very similar to what normally called prisoner swap agreements. For example, last year, the Australian citizen Kylie Moore Gilbert was released from Iran in a similar prisoner exchange situation where 3 Iranians were released at the same time. Now, for that case, but the governments were also very reluctant to call a prisoner swap program. So in all these situations, governments don't like to label a prisoner exchange. One possible reason is that these kind of exchanges raise what's called a moral hazard question. So, for example, China may see this deal as a successful use of hostage diplomacy. So they then may be encouraged to use the same tactic in the future.
And that's a great point you make, because they moved very quickly to release the two Canadians, the two Michaels as they became known, that they've been holding for some time. Could that be kind of a warning that, you know, this is actually what that was all about?
I think in this particular case, it's quite obvious from the very start that it was what it is about. The detention of the two Canadians were very blatantly related to Canada's detention of Meng, despite official denial. So this quick release exchange of the two sides makes it even more clear that the entire thing was political.
Was it disappointing in your view, though, that the US went down this path?
Somewhat, but I think especially for the families of the two Canadians, it is a very, very good news. And I can totally understand why they end up doing that.
So who, in your view, blinked first, though, with regard to this whole issue?
I think as the case with most international relations negotiations, there are a lot of back and forth. I wouldn't really want to point the one party as to the one that blinked first, but especially in this case is even more interesting because it involves three countries. So Meng was detained in Canada, but not because Meng violated any Canadian laws, but because Canada has an extradition treaty with the United States. And the United States has accused Meng of violating US sanctions. So it is almost all up to the United States to determine whether Meng gets released or not. Yet Canada is stuck in the middle with two of its citizens get arrested as a result.
Yeah. So, you know, what does this mean, though, for future foreign nationals in China? It doesn't necessarily take away the risk that they could be detained by China.
No, if anything, it could even increase the risk because China has seen this as a successful tactic. So for foreign citizens in China, China may think, oh, well, last time it has worked out, so we will just arrest some more foreign citizens if any other countries were to arrest any of China's valued citizens. But of course, there are still a lot of foreigners in China, including Americans, Canadians, Australians. So on the individual level, the risk is still very low, but the risk is certainly there and it potentially has increased.
What might it mean for those Australians detained in China? We have Cheng Lei and Yang Henjun. Is there any sense that they may also, there may be some opportunity to bargain for their release?
I think those two cases are less clear. In the case of the two Canadians, the motivations behind their arrest were very, very clear. So in that sense, the price for them to get released is also clear. But with Cheng Lei and Yang Henjun, the reasons for their arrest is less clear. It may have nothing to do with Australia-China bilateral relations. It may have more to do with what they've done in China or what they know in China. So I think the lesson to be drawn from that is less clear.
Yeah. You know, the United Nations just last week said to both China and the US that they need to fix their relationship because it's causing broader issues globally with this kind of Cold War divide. With what's happened here, what do you think that might mean for the relationship?
It does seem like for this specific case, China and the United States have used a more pragmatic approach to the relationship. So in that sense, it may signal a better relationship in the future. But so far from everything else that has happened in the recent past, that has not been the case. So perhaps it is a sign of a renewal, a turn for the better in the relationship, but we will have to wait and see.
Yeah. And just finally, you know, what does it mean for accountability for Chinese nationals who are doing business overseas? You know, China is very strong to say that they don't flout any of the laws of another country. But this sort of not knowing how this would have played out in court, it does, you know, beg the question of whether Chinese nationals then become immune.
So Meng's case is a little bit special in that Huawei is a company that's supported by the Chinese government, and Meng Wanzhou is what's known as a Huawei princess. According to the official Chinese narrative, Meng was wrongfully detained. In fact, according to that narrative, she was detained as a way to punish Huawei and to contain China's progress. And in that sense, then, from China's perspective, Meng was a political prisoner, unlike what we are used to. And official messaging, of course, promotes patriotism, the narrative that the country is now powerful enough to stand up to other countries, and Chinese citizens can rely on the government when they're overseas. But I think most Chinese citizens understand that this is a special case. It is Huawei, it is the CFO of Huawei, and actually the founder's daughter. For most ordinary citizens, they understand the country will not bail them out.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Yun Jiang, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Australians are already booking flights overseas for December, but there is no guarantee they'll be able to travel by then. It's looking likely that international borders will be reopened by Christmas, but the airline industry wants more certainty. Here's Rihanna Whitson.
It's been almost 2 years since Jill Harris has been back to the UK to see her family.
Oh my goodness me, who's that?
Instead, her mother's had to get to know 7-month-old Harry through video calls.
We speak to Grandma every day. She doesn't want to miss out on a thing, and she's desperate for a cuddle if we can get home for Christmas.
Ms Harris has booked a flight to London with Qantas, but there is no guarantee borders will reopen by then. She's also prepared to postpone her trip if they have to quarantine in a hotel when they get back.
We just don't think that having Harry will be 10 months old by then in a hotel for 2 weeks would work.
While some airlines are selling international flights from mid-December, the industry wants more clarity.
We do not know yet where Australians will be allowed to travel.
Before the pandemic, 52 airlines flew to Australia, but now there are only 18. The peak body for international carriers says the confusion could mean some companies don't rush back.
So if US start to open up a lot more and you can start flying much more to Europe, for example, then guess what? They are just going to take their services over there.
Singapore Airlines recently cancelled additional flights to Australia because of the ongoing uncertainty.
We don't have that clarity around whether international arrival caps will continue to be in place come December, and whether or not or how incoming passengers will be treated and classified by the government.
Airlines want a national approach to restarting overseas travel, but that's unlikely when states like Western Australia, Queensland and Tasmania are already backing away from the plan to reopen borders when 80% of Australians over 16 are fully vaccinated. In Perth, these parents also fear it'll be a long time before visitors vaccinated with Sinovac are let into the country.
It's actually created some emotional stress for the whole families.
Until then, this is as close as they'll get to their relatives in China. Rihanna Whitson, ABC News.
Over the weekend, 2 European nations have voted in favour of major progressive social reforms. Switzerland voted to legalise same-sex marriage through a referendum. Meanwhile, the small Republic of San Marino overwhelmingly supported its referendum to legalise abortion, becoming the latest predominantly Catholic state to approve the procedure.
Toute la Suisse est verte!
Sunday was a historic day for the LGBT community in Switzerland.
Yes, today I am very happy. This is a historic day for us and for Switzerland. We had to wait for 8 years for the vote to happen, and here, this is a big yes.
Almost 2/3 of Swiss voters supported legalizing same-sex marriage. bringing the Alpine nation into line with most other Western European countries.
There's a huge split, even inside a small country like Switzerland. There's a difference between cities and countryside, even between the French side and the German side.
Same-sex couples will now also be able to adopt children, which drew concern from opponents.
To my knowledge, the couples who have trouble having children don't have the same facilities that we want to give to non-heterosexual couples.
I think what is important for a child is to be loved and respected, and some children are neither loved nor respected by heterosexual couples, so I don't have any issue or reluctance with this.
There was another important referendum over the weekend, this time in the small republic of San Marino. The predominantly Catholic nation voted to legalize abortion. It was strongly opposed by the Catholic Church, but around 77% of the micronation's population voted to support the procedure. Surrounded on all sides by Italy, women in San Marino usually traveled to the neighboring country for abortions, but supporters of the referendum argued this is an undue financial burden and penalized women who were victims of rape.
The choice to have an abortion belongs to the person, but the state, being a rightful state according to me, must provide its citizens with this opportunity.
The referendum was set after 3,000 people signed a petition to overturn the 150-year-old law. Stevie Zhang, ABC News.
Well, let's return to Germany, and the complicated negotiations that take place following the elections can be a high-wire act, balancing policies and platforms from a range of different parties. Jeremy Fernandez takes a look at some of those coalitions and the likely contenders for Chancellor once all the bartering is done.
These are the colours of Germany's political parties. None of them ever wins an election outright, so they need to form coalitions, which to outsiders sounds pretty weird and worldly. Put the Christian Democratic Union, the Greens and the FDP together and you get the Jamaica Coalition, because their colours are also those of the Jamaican flag. Swap the FDP for the SDP and you get the Kenya Coalition. The Greens, the SDP and the FDP make the Traffic Light Coalition, and if the two biggest parties form government, you've got two options. Led by the Greens, it's a Kiwi Coalition. Led by the Union, it's the Black-Green Coalition, which compared to the rest sounds a little dull, so Germans call it the Pizza Connection. This one's got nothing to do with colour. It's because this union was formed at a pizza shop in Bonn in the 1990s. Knowing just who will win the German election is confusing, and this time there's one big reason why it's harder than ever. Nobody's quite sure of the size of the personal vote Angela Merkel brought to the table. Taking over her party is Armin Laschet. He should be a clear favourite, but his stance on lockdowns has been inconsistent, which has left Germans wondering about his convictions. And being caught cracking jokes during the country's recent floods didn't go down so well. Annalena Baerbock is the leader of the Greens, and unlike many other countries, Germany's Greens have broad appeal.
Annalena Baerbock ist heute Abend zu Gast im NEWSThe Royal.
She's also a former trampolining champion.
Und bei 3 kommt dann der Absprung.
The Greens have doubled their position in the polls since the last election, and they have a good chance of being part of any coalition. There's also Olaf Scholz, nicknamed the Scholzomat for what some call his robotic presentation style.
We want to be successful in 2050 with a CO2 neutral economy.
He's been Germany's finance minister, overseeing the €750 billion post-pandemic stimulus package to revive Germany's economy. He's criticised lockdowns, saying they ought to be more targeted and have better testing. And then there's the anti-immigration AfD, which won seats for the first time in 2017. They rode a wave of anger over the migrant crisis and ended up with 91 seats. They are hostile to the EU and see Islam as a threat to traditional German values. But since the pandemic overtook immigration as the main worry for most Germans, their popularity has slumped. After 16 years with one leader, change is coming to Germany. Germany. But which blocs will form a coalition and who becomes the next Chancellor is anyone's guess.
A bunch of surfing dogs have taken to the waves to showcase some skills. The 12th annual Surf City Surf Dog Competition has been held in Huntington Beach, California. The competition featured 40 dogs from around the world performing feats of balance and dexterity on the waves. There were several classes including solo surfers, dog duos and dog-human tandems. The Manly Sea Eagles' Tom Trobjevic has been crowned the 2021 Dally M medalist. The fullback had an unassailable lead before the final round of the season to be crowned the NRL's best and fairest. Sam Walker was named Rookie of the Year, while the Melbourne Storm's Craig Bellamy was awarded Coach of the Year. Meanwhile, Storm player Justin Olam won Centre of the Year alongside the Panthers' Matt Burton after initially being snubbed in the nominations. Originally from PNG, Olam was one of the side's most consistent performers, scoring 12 tries in 23 matches. And Melbourne celebrations are showing no signs of slowing down 48 hours after the Demons secured that drought-breaking premiership. Melbourne players are staying in Perth for several days to soak up Saturday night's victory. The squad has been making the most of relaxed COVID-19 restrictions in WA with raucous celebrations at several Perth pubs. But the Demons have vowed to party with Victorian fans as soon as rules allow.
We want to get back to Melbourne and celebrate with our people and our families and our friends, and we can't wait until lockdown lifts enough that we can relive the whole thing at the MCG with everybody.
Melbourne's players will return to Victoria later this week. The USA has reclaimed golf's Ryder Cup with a 19-9 thrashing of Europe in Wisconsin. It's the largest victory margin since Europe joined the biennial competition in 1979. Dustin Johnson became only the 5th player in the tournament's history to win all 5 of his matches. And reigning world champion Lewis Hamilton has become the first driver to win 100 Formula One races after an error from Lando Norris cost him victory in Sochi. The McLaren driver Norris was heading for his first win in Formula One, but as the track got slippery late in the race, he decided not to change tyres. Hamilton did switch to intermediate tyres with 3 laps to go. The rain got heavier and Norris lost control.
And Hamilton takes the lead of the race as Lando Norris slides off the track.
Devastated in a way. Just my decision. I thought it was the way to go.
Norris finished 7th. Hamilton took the checkered flag in front of Max Verstappen to regain the championship lead. Australia's Daniel Ricciardo finished 4th. Australian cliff diver Rhiannon Ifland has made history again and maintained her World Championship title at the World Series in Italy. Diving in the picturesque old town of Pilignano a Mare along Italy's Adriatic coastline, the 5-time champion maintained her 100% win record. Gary Hunt also held on to his World Championship title for a 9th time. Ifland says she is thrilled with this year's campaign.
It makes me want to keep pushing for more, really. And yeah, this year the competition was very, very strong, and I knew that before I even came into the beginning of the season. So I had to push harder and harder, and yeah, it feels nice to be a pioneer and to be the girl in the top spot.
Let's get a look at the national weather. Here's Jenny Woodward.
Hello everyone. Well, today, despite the widespread high cloud to the south, most of the shower and storm activity has been in the southwest of the country and over eastern districts from northern parts of New South Wales up into central Queensland. On the map, the Tasman High is pushing a southeasterly surge up the coast, and that's been feeding a lot of moisture into eastern parts ahead of an inland trough. Now, we've seen those few showers and storms develop, but that trough system is going to drift west tomorrow and link up with the next one that's on the way. And with the help of an upper system, we'll see widespread showers and storms, some rain areas of 25 to 50 millimetres, and that will develop from Tasmania all the way up to central Queensland. Some isolated falls of 100 millimetres and more are possible, but those heavier falls are really going to kick in on Wednesday. But tomorrow in Queensland, showers about the east coast north of Gladstone. They're more likely about the north tropical coast. There's a slight chance of showers and storms about the southern interior, but mostly sunny skies otherwise. A few showers Showers on and west of the ranges of New South Wales. Partly cloudy. There's the chance of a thunderstorm in the west, and there'll be some morning fog about the eastern ranges. Sydney's looking at 23 degrees. Cloud increasing with isolated showers about the western parts of Victoria. That'll increase through the northern and central regions through the afternoon and throughout the evening. And we might see some isolated thunderstorms across the north as well. In Tasmania, fine apart from some showers in the far south and then in the north through the afternoon. And there'll be some morning fog and frost areas and generally light winds. Showers and possibly some storms in South Australia. A west-southwesterly change will be extending through from the west, 23 the top in Port Lincoln. Showers over the west, mainly in the southern coastal districts and along the Euclid coast, and to the north in the Territory, mostly cloudy. Some showers about the Tiwi Islands and the western top end, and there's the chance of afternoon storms near the west coast.
Our top stories tonight. Queensland has recorded one local COVID case in the community with the source of infection currently under investigation. A public health alert has been issued for locations in Eatons Hill, Albany Creek, Aspley and Rockley. German Social Democrat Olaf Scholz pledges to form a coalition government before Christmas after the weekend's general election. And one dead and several injured after a 5.8 magnitude earthquake struck Greece's largest island of Crete. And that's your World this Monday. If you'd like to see more world news and interviews, do take a look at the ABC's YouTube channel. I'm Bev O'Connor. Have a great evening. I'll see you tomorrow.